Thank you for joining us for this 10-minute talk on pay transparency. I'm joined by Stuart Hyland, who is a brilliant partner at Blick Rothenberg. He's a rewards consultant and advisory business leader with a wealth of experience in reward schemes and helping companies compete for top global talent. He joins us today to talk specifically about his recent work on EU pay transparency regulations and their impact on UK-based organizations. Thank you for joining us, Stuart.
Good to see you. Thank you.
My first question for you is, what is actually required now of UK employers with respect to pay transparency?
For UK employers, currently very little. We obviously in the UK have to disclose our gender pay gap report, and we are expecting that to be extended to ethnicity and disability with the new Labour government over the coming months. We're just waiting for that legislation to come through. But on pay transparency, the current requirements from a regulatory perspective for the UK are very light indeed.
Thank you. That's really helpful. But what are the major trends for pay transparency globally? Because I understand that although there's not a lot required of UK employers right now, legally, that's not the case in many jurisdictions. So by way of example, can you tell us what the EU pay transparency requirements are in broad strokes?
Yeah, I'll do my best. It's a complex topic, but I'll try and give the sort of quite a simple painting by numbers answer. It really does cover a lot of the breadth of the employee life cycle. So yes, when people apply for a job, they have to know what they're applying for, and they have to be able to see what the pay and the related information is all around sort of bonus benefits, and all that detail has to be available to them. They, as a candidate, will know that they do not have to answer any questions. Employers should not be asking them any questions about their current pay or any of their pay history. But then once people are in the door, once you've got them on board, there's a lot of communication challenges for you to address as an employer potentially. So, for example, employees will have the right every single year to ask for information about how their pay compares directly with roles uh, that are rated as equivalent work, equivalent value, and as with any sort of direct comparator roles. And you have to provide that information on an averaged male and female basis. So that is information an employee can ask for every single year for you to provide in writing. Not only that, you as the employer have to remind them of that right to ask every single year as well. It's one of those things actually we're advising clients to really just embed that into their business as usual practices. Why wait for an employee to ask? But there's a whole host of other stuff and implications around this as well. For example, if you have any reward elements that have a high degree of management discretion, the classic example is the bonus scheme where you give a team leader, a manager, a pot of money and ask them to distribute it amongst their people. You're going to need to really evolve that program. If you just give it to the manager and they have discretion in how they give it out, those programs are going to have to change. They're going to have to be given more guidance, more of a framework, so perhaps a link to performance, a closer and stronger link to performance, or some other factor. But you're not going to be able just to run those schemes, and that creates a huge amount of change in some sectors more than others. So you've got that change coming in across the EU. Bonus schemes, the highly discretionary practices have got to go and be replaced by something with more structure. Also, you're going to have to use an analytical job evaluation methodology. There are several very well-known versions out in the marketplace, and the regulations give details on what is needed for it to be considered a robust vehicle to calculate work of equal value across the business. And again, there's a lot in there. The general schemes do comply, but you need to make sure it's what they call an analytical methodology, which is one that breaks jobs down into its component parts. If you're currently using a whole job matching scheme, and these are the types that are used by market data houses, so that when you are benchmarking, you compare these capsule job descriptions to position your roles, they are not likely to be considered robust. So if you're using a grading framework, a job architecture system that doesn't rely on or isn't underpinned in some form or other by an analytical job evaluation methodology, you're going to have a look at that as well. So that's just a couple of the sort of big ticket items. There's a lot of other details in there as well, but they're the changes that organizations tend to start with once they've looked at their overall reward strategy, because you're going to have to publish large chunks of it so employees can see it. So we tend to see firms starting with their reward strategy and then looking at refining, evolving all of those practices underneath, of which the bonus schemes, the job architecture are two really common evolutions at the moment.
Thank you. That's a really helpful overview. I'm mindful that it is about the EU, and so you'll probably anticipate my next question, which is, so why should UK-based employers care about these trends, and in particular about the EU pay transparency regulations? There's the obvious answer is that there are some multinational employers who may want to have commonality between their employees across different jurisdictions. And of course, we can see how, employee rights, for example, in England will impact on an organization that also has offices in the US and marrying up some of those policies. But what are the other reasons that a UK employer should be mindful of these changes?
I think there's two primary reasons why. Um, Even if you only have people in the UK and you have no one overseas anywhere, there are two primary reasons why you need to be aware of these and already starting to think about them and plan for them. The first is that I've been talking to clients about this now for probably about 2 years from when the regulations were first in draft. And I don't know, it's well into sort of well over 100 employers that I've spoken to about it. Every single employer has said exactly the same thing to me, and that is primarily they are not planning on differentiating their practices in the UK. They are not just going to treat the UK differently to the rest of Europe. They're saying it's too complex. It doesn't feel right. You know, the complexity and the challenge around a line manager who might have people across borders and being able to say to one group of employees one set of information and something less or more to others just doesn't feel right. So they're all saying the same thing. They are going to bring that practice to the UK, whether it is required here or not. That is going to change the talent market. So if you are in the market for recruitment, if you are trying to retain your people, you need to be aware that there are going to be other offers on the table and other employers trying to poach your staff by giving them a really transparent pay framework and pay structure. And we know that employees love that level of transparency. They really appreciate it. It's very engaging for them to understand what's coming. So the market here is going to change around you if you don't start to evolve and change some of your practices as well. The second reason, fortunately much briefer than the first one, the second reason is really simple. We've got a new Labour government, and everything that we're seeing so far is indicating that they are also starting to look at workers' rights and thinking about pay transparency. There was a lot of stories back in the spring that the Labour Party at the time in opposition, but they had been looking quite closely at what the EU regulations were and what they could mean here. So in short, we are expecting some form of change over the next year or two in the UK, regardless of whether you are going to be in the EU, whether you're going to have people overseas. The chances are the market around us is going to change quite a lot in the very near future.
That's really interesting. Thank you. I found it particularly interesting that you were saying some top talent will be attracted to pay transparency and reward schemes which have a high level of transparency. One argument you may often hear from companies is actually not having that transparency affords them the ability to make a really big offer to a top candidate, for example. So can you tell us a little bit more about the psychology behind why some top talent would be particularly interested in an offer with a high level of transparency?
Yeah, of course. And the regulations do not necessarily restrict your ability to differentiate pay just because it's all about pay equality, about pay transparency and work of equal value. There are still reward mechanisms that you can use to differentiate pay, but you've got to have a framework in place. What it's trying to remove is some of those ad hoc schemes that I'm sure we've all seen where there's very little control and very little centralization of them. This is just trying to put a framework, and by doing that, remove the opportunity for potential discrimination in the process. But in terms of the psychology, there are studies and there's research out there which shows if you put two packages in front of an individual, and one of them is really transparent and explains how everything works, even if there's a lot more documentation for that individual to read through, fine. And then if you then give them another one, which might be a much shorter, much more succinct letter or offer, which says your salary is going to be this, your bonus is this, and basically don't worry about how it works. We'll look after you and we'll move you through at a rate as quickly as we can. People will, by overwhelming majority, will always go for the transparency option because it feels fair, it feels clear. They're having the rules of the game explained to them really clearly up front, and that is very, very attractive and compelling. And when you actually look at some of that research and the statistics behind it, the numbers attracted actually increase as you go into the younger age brackets, because they live in a world where with 2 clicks of a mouse, you can find an answer to just about everything in the universe, except for why does my employer pay me the way that they do? So really, the psychology behind it is just people understanding and feeling the fairness and transparency really clearly and really visibly. And that plays to most people's social morals, their social conscience, as well as actually, I just know the rules of this game. I get how it's played. I know what I have to do to succeed here.
What would be your number one piece of advice to employers who are just getting their heads around this and they're thinking about implementing some of these changes themselves?
Thank you. Yeah, I think the most important thing is, well, first of all, you're looking at it, which is great. So keep going with that. But the second is please act now. And if you take nothing else away from this session other than this, then it will be a win for us and for you. But please act now. Don't wait. Don't delay any further. The EU regulations come into effect officially from June 2026. Now, that sounds like an age away. We've got 2 years to prepare. We'll start looking at this next summer. And we're also still waiting for countries and member states of the EU to publish details of exactly what it's going to look like across each of those individual countries. We've got a guide coming through already in Sweden, and we kind of know what's coming. But the reality is we already know those core requirements. You don't need to wait for the details to start acting now. So really do start with that process. It takes a long time to deliver some of the changes that we're talking about. If you can imagine, if you have to deliver a new grade structure underpinned by a job evaluation tool, if you need to redesign your bonus plan, your incentive plans, if you need to think about your approach to performance management or even the market data that you use, trying to do all of those in 1 year is going to be nigh on impossible and really stretch the team and anything else you might have planned anyway. 2 years is enough time, just. So start now, start with a diagnostic, look at what it is that you're currently doing, how it compares to all of the core features of the regulations, and start your action plan. Even if you do go through and find out, actually, we're 90% compliant, we don't need to do an awful lot. Great, at least you know that now, and you can plan the work in for next year. So that's my big takeaway and big ask of employers across the UK, across the EU. Please start planning now. Don't wait for a magic date sometime in the future, because there isn't going to be one. And time lost now isn't something you're going to be able to recover because the deadline is fixed. The train has left the station. It's going to arrive at your office, at your building in June 2026, come what may. You need to be ready for it.
And I suppose for UK employers, the reality is even though they might not be required to meet these regulations, comply with these regulations by that date, their competition potentially will be. And so if they want to remain at the cutting edge, then they need to be looking at these changes as well.
Absolutely. One of my clients is already doing some simple things on the transparency front, like publishing the package at point of recruitment so everyone knows, and they're starting to be really transparent in some of the reward comms and complying with a number of boxes already under the EU regulations. And they have said that they can't believe how much of an edge it's given them in the marketplace because they're the only one who's doing this right now. So they're doing their best to build their talent pool. as much as possible now before the competition catch up and are able to do the same thing.
Thank you so much, Stuart. This has been really, really fascinating. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this 10-minute talk. For more 10-minute talks and other resources, please visit our website at www.cm-murray.com. Thank you.